friends, I welcome you all. I am Upendra Padi over here. I welcome all participants to. We are very happy that Dr. Nikhil Gowda has joined with us as the speaker in today's first session webinar. I welcome Dr. Gowda to our webinar.
Thank you, sir.
And friends, as you all know, Dr. Nikhil Gowda, currently he is the Assistant Professor, Department of Media and Communication, Central University of Tamil Nadu. Dr. Nikhil Gowda is a PhD and UGC NET scholar, and he has subject specialist in health communication, communication theory, development communication, radio and advertising with academic administration, students counseling and crisis management. He has a long experience of more than 15 years both in academic and media industry in Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, Punjab, Delhi and Odisha. A regular part in the national and international workshops, conferences. Dr. Gowda has many research paper articles and books, chapter on to his credit. We are very happy to welcome Dr. Nikhil Gowda to today's webinar. And as per the circular we have given, Dr. Gowda, basically he will highlight the normative theories, philosophical inspiration and background and need. And you all will enjoy today's discussion of Dr. Nikhil Gowda. And participants, let me announce over here again the same thing yesterday as I told you all. You need not worry for the e-certificate. We will issue a feedback format at the end of the series of this webinar, and accordingly we will fill up and submit the e-certificates will be generated and we will send you by email. So you need not worry for the e-certificates. And we are very happy that you have joined regularly with our webinar, and your joining and participation in this webinar really help us to carry forward this program. And again, I welcome you all to this webinar. I also welcome our academic advisor, Professor of Eminence in Tajpur University Department of Dr. Sunil Kant Behra. He is also with us. At the end of the discussion of Dr. Nikhil Gowda, we will go for Q&A. Request you all to share your questions in the chat box. Accordingly, our host will share all of your questions in the screen. And at the end of the discussion, Dr. Nikhil Gowda will answer all of your doubts and queries and questions, whatever you will put. With these words, again, I welcome Dr. Nikhil Gowda to our webinar first session. Now I request Dr. Gowda to continue his discussion.
Good morning, sir. Is it to shape the career and life of thousands of students in India? So I thank sir for inviting me, for sharing my thoughts on normative theories, philosophical inspirations, background, and need. Students, I think some of you are students and also friends. Today, the learning objectives which I have kept is that after the presentation, we'll appreciate I think, sir, we can share the screen. So this is normative theories, philosophical inspirations, background, and need. Then, yeah, the learning objective which I think we would, after this presentation, we will appreciate the context and need leading to normative theories, the background and philosophical inspirations behind normative theories, relevance of normative theories in the internet era. These three things we will appreciate after this presentation. Then, now, as you know, friends, that normative theories, something is defined that a theory describing an ideal way a media system should be structured and operated. And I don't think that anybody who doesn't know about it, normative theory is somebody who is into the field of communication and communication study and research. He or she knows about theories, and it reminds me of the slogan of Steel Authority of India Limited that used to be, there is little bit of steel in everybody's life. And I think that there is little bit of normative theory understanding in everybody's life. So with this, let's start. And sometimes many ask me, why did I select this topic? Generally, this aspect of normative theory is not allotted sufficient discussion time in media classrooms. I mean, discussing about the philosophical inspirations, context, the background, for various reasons, for want of time and other considerations. So I thought, let's discuss it because to understand and internalize a particular theory. And sometimes also students ask us in classrooms that what is the need of learning theories with great detail, or the utility of theories, and uh, and mostly they do realize it once they enter into the media practice. They understand the importance of theory. Whenever they are stuck in something, theories help us to guide what to do and what not to do. It is a guiding light. After all, what is a theory? It is something that helps us to know why and how things happen. Things means phenomena means something that has existence. That's why I thought we should discuss this. This one is why do we need it? Sometimes we ask, why do we need normative theories? To answer this, we may ask a few questions, and this is for everybody. First question is that, should an Indian journalist downplay the cartographic assertion of Nepal vis-a-vis India? First question, should an Indian journalist downplay the cartographic assertion of Nepal vis-a-vis India? Second question, is it appropriate to invade people's privacy by journalists to collect news in national interest? Third question to all of you, in pandemic like COVID, should media cover authorities' unpreparedness even when it is instilling insecurity in public? If I answer this question, I know the house would be clearly divided. There won't be any clear-cut agreement on it. And probably the answers will get it by the theories. But these are certain questions, these are the dilemmas, we get the answers by normative theories. And that's why we study it. Next, we have the origin and documentation. Sometimes about who gets the credit for this normative theories. But I would like to say that this has been developed over time from many sources, from many directions, including academics, media practitioners, and social. Nobody gets the credit for developing this normative theory. And of course, the seminal work is by Fred Siebert, Theodore Peterson, and Wilberstrom in their book called Four Theories of the Press, published in 1956. And there they documented it. And after that, there was a systemic study of these normative theories. These normative theories, as you know, described in the four theories of this are authoritarian theory, libertarian theory, responsibility theory, and Soviet media theory. As I told you in the beginning that I won't go into the detail of these theories or features of these theories. Just one liner we can, for the sake of our discussion. Authoritarian theory says that complete obedience to the authority, that is, and a complete obedience of the media system to the authority. Libertarian theory is that media should be completely free from the clutches of authority. It's totally different. And social responsibility theory is a compromise between these two. That is, media should be free, but with some social responsibility. Then Soviet media theory, that it says that the media system should work for the working class. That is the Soviet media theory. Anyway, now how did it start? How did it begin? Now, if to understand this, we have to go to yellow journalism, the period of yellow journalism. Everybody knows what is yellow journalism. That is developed in America in 1880s, and yellow here is a sensationalization of news, fabrication of facts, and exaggeration of objectivity. Public sensitivities were compromised, and yellow is all. It was called yellow for various reasons, and one of the reasons is because in Europe at that point of time, yellow symbol, the color yellow symbolized, that means of substandard, inferior quality. So those who practiced, those who thought they did not practice the cheap journalism, they called the others who practiced cheap journalism as yellow journalism. That's how the name came. Or there are also other reasons for it. And yellow journalism was there prevailing, and then after that, the people were frustrated, disappointed. There was a large-scale public outcry to reform the media. There was a crusade, aggressive campaign to clean up the media that happened, started in 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, and coupled with Cold War politics. I would say this Cold War politics. You know, after World War II, the world was divided into two blocks. One was right home here is that he never believed in democracy. Sometimes people, students who are not of political science, it might be baffling for them that Plato was not a great believer of democracy. He didn't believe that people can handle this responsibility. He said that there only a few wise men can take the decision of the state. Otherwise, it will be a great failure. He talked about very interesting things, as I was telling. I talked about sacred marriage, where he said that the military class, they should not own property, they should not marry, they should not have family. And he talked about sacred marriage, where somebody is in the prime of his youth, and a partner should be provided for mating. All these things might sound a little interesting and surprising today, but it is true. And author, I would like to say, author Amish Tripathi of Shiva Trilogy fame has borrowed so many ideas from his writings. If you have read this, you'll appreciate it that the Melwas Gurukul system is one such idea that was given by Plato. The point I would like to basically drive home is that Plato was never a supporter of decentralization of power or giving power to the public, and he was for the strict control of state power under a few people. That is, then next is Thomas Hobbes, is a British philosopher of eminence, believed that human beings are at their core selfish creatures. Human beings are selfish creatures, and in one of his quotes, he mentions that the life of a man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The condition of man is a condition of war to everyone against everyone. He has mentioned it in his work, The Leviathan, and this is, he believed only true and correct form of government was the absolute monarchy. So he said that if we give power to public, then they will always engage in war, and there won't be any lasting peace and order in the state. Then we have Dr. Samuel Johnson, the English writer. In his words, he says that every society has a right to preserve public peace and order, and therefore has a good right to prohibit the propagation of opinions which have a dangerous tendency. He says that the propagation of opinion has a dangerous tendency. So every society has a right to preserve public peace and order. I would like all of you to just note how these philosophers and his philosophies and their philosophy control. Next one is John Jacob, John Jacob Engel, German thinker. He writes, he further reinforced the theory by stating that freedom came into its supreme right only under authoritarianism. So these are the philosophers. And next, we have the colonial rule. This is in technocratic control, in fact, is a description of 2 or more centuries of control of the press by various repressive regimes all over the world, in the US, in Africa, in Asia. And this is a description how they have been able to rule by suppressing the vernacular press. That is a description of it. Now we'll move to radical libertarianism. That this is, and the philosophers, those who have contributed to this idea, first is Lao Tzu, that's an extraordinary Chinese thinker, philosopher who flourished during the 6th century BC, author of Tao Te Ching, and believed living a simple life and non-interference with nature. What Lao Tzu believed is that living a simple life and non-interference with nature, no interference in anything, let there be what it is, and is one of his quotes will amplify his philosophy. The quotes goes like this: life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. So this quote will amplify his philosophy. It says no interference, including anything whatsoever that is. Then we'll go to another philosopher, John Stuart Mill. Is one of the most influential thinkers of the history of classical liberalism, a strong advocate of free discourse and freedom of speech. His quote I would like to mention here is that the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity, as well as the existing generation. Those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. That's John Stuart Mill for you. Next, we'll go to John Locke, from 1632 to 1704, English philosopher and physician, known as father of liberalism. Unlike Thomas Hobbes, Locke believed that human nature is characterized by reason and tolerance. He believed, unlike Hobbes, he believed that human beings are good, they have reason, they are reason, rational human being, and tolerant. One of his quotes will exemplify it, that new opinions are always suspected and usually opposed without any other reason but because they are not already common. So another philosopher worth noting is John Milton, the British writer philosopher, in his Areopagitica, published in 1644, asserts that in a fair debate, good and truthful arguments will always win out over lies and deceits. If this were true, a new and better social order could be forged using public debate. This is called Milton's self-writing principle. What he said is that if the idea if an argument is good, then in a fair debate it will win. No need for any restriction or any suppression of that. Then there's a few events which worth noting. One is French Declaration, and then the many philosophers associated with French Revolution. Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, containing the principles that inspired the French Revolution. It's 17 articles adopted between August 20 and August 26, 1789 by France National Assembly. In its Article 11, guarantees freedom of speech within the bounds of public order and law. Another one is the Protestant Reformation, but worth mentioning here. The Protestant Reformation was a major event in the 16th century European movement, and reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, Henry VIII challenged the papal authority and questioned Catholic Church's ability to define Christian practice. They demanded greater freedom for individuals over their own lives and thoughts, and no restrictions. Martin Luther, of 95 Theses fame, is penned down this, was very skillful to use the power of printing press during this time. Now, the First Amendment and Bill of Rights, these are also worth mentioning. And you will see that how all these have contributed to the idea of radical libertarianism. First Amendment of US Constitution, that it reads that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the US Constitution. All individuals have natural rights that no government, community, or group can take away. various forms of communication freedom, that is including speech, press, and assembly are among them. So these are some of the point I wanted to drive home, is that these are some of the philosophers and their philosophies, the events that contributed to the formulation of the idea of radical libertarianism. Next, we'll go to the post-war compromise on which the social responsibility theory came into being. First, there was pressure for government regulation of media throughout World War II and after it. We know from the writings of Laswell and Lieberman how there was the spread of propaganda throughout World War II and even after it to counter the communist movement. And then there was, so it put a lot of pressure on the government in the US to reform the media, to inject some professionalism to reform. Then the response came from the industry. By Henry Luce, CEO of Time Incorporation, established a commission called Hutchins Commission in 1942 under the chairmanship of Robert Hutchins, Chancellor of University of Chicago. He established this, and this was based on whatever recommendation they gave, that is based on Chicago School's philosophy of public communication. It says primarily that cities, they thought of modern cities as great communities with pluralistic groups, and media should do everything possible to give voice to those various groups present, the various pluralistic groups. The commission was divided, however, the commission was divided on putting restriction on press freedom, because this was at the backdrop of the propaganda, the mainstream media not performing its responsibility. However, some of the members of the commission, they were not in favor of putting restriction on media, because the start is then the government or the authority will get a way to put restrictions in future. So that's how there was it is called a post-war compromise. So the essence of this is that media should be free, but with some social responsibility. Now, next we'll go to this communist ideology. Here it says that the media system should work for the working class. And there are many philosophers, from Marxist and neo-Marxist philosophers that contributed to this idea. One, obviously, Karl Marx theory, arguing that hierarchical class system is at the root of all social problems, must be ended by a revolution of the proletariat or the working class. Elites maintain themselves in power throughout their control over culture or the superstructure of the society. He said culture is something that elites freely manipulated to mislead average people and encourage them to act against their own interest. So media, being an instrument of culture, should be used to reverse the system. That means to the proletariat to overthrow the ruling class. Next, a philosopher I would like to quote here is that Louis-Pierre Althusser is a French Marxist philosopher, gave the concept of communication ideological state apparatus. In fact, he gave the concept of ideological state apparatus. In Marxist philosophy, Marx has talked about repressive state apparatus. That means those state apparatuses or instruments that repress the people to maintain its rule. But Althusser said that no, it is for sustained rule, only repressive state apparatuses are not sufficient. This is coupled with ideological state apparatus, and the religion, the education, they are the examples of various ideological state apparatuses. And he also said that communication ideological state apparatus is also important to maintain, to sustain their rule. ISA, he says, that naturalizes the process of subjugation to certain rules, ways of life, and thought processes developed and sustained by the dominating classes to ensure their position in the society. Of course, there are other philosophers. They have contributed contributed to the idea of communist ideology. Now we will discuss normative theories in the internet era. With the arrival of internet and its enabled platforms, the media landscape is going through a disruptive transition that we all know. Now we have what is more voice to the people. People before that, people were connected up. They were connected to each other through mass media, but now they are sharing. They are connected across. More voice to the people, and fostering communities is easy. Then audience is no more atomized. Previously, audience were atomized. That means they were connected up, accessing media, and media was the through the through media they were getting information, they were connected, but now they are connected across with by sharing of information at their end and receiving information from others. This has come. So this is the time to redefine all these normative theories, and the internet and internet enabled platforms are giving a strong competition to the mainstream media for and in its role. That's how it's time to redefine and study these theories in a different perspective. Now, other normative theories that was given given by William Hasson's perspective, and he has given 5 concepts. One is Western, the development, then revolutionary, authoritarian, and communism. Western concept, it combines the aspect of libertarianism and social responsibility theory. Then the development concept, it combines the aspects of it says that government and media work together for development of a nation. Then revolutionary, it says that media are used in the service of revolution, whether government permits or not. Then authoritarian, here both in authoritarian and communism, it is the complete domination of media by the government for the purpose of forcing those media to serve the government, and in communism it is for the Communist Party. The difference between authoritarian and communist theory is that in authoritarian it is whosoever is there in the authority, and in communism always to the working class or the Communist Party. So this is how this is what I just wanted to discuss with you. My point of discussion was that philosophies, different philosophies and philosophical inspirations, the background and the events that gave rise to certain theories, which would help us understand and internalize them and chalk out our plan whenever we are stuck in our work in the field or in academics. This much for you all. Thank you very much, sir, and over to you. Sir, you are not audible. Padi sir, you are not audible. Yes, sir.
Padi sir, unmute karantu.
Yeah, Padi sir, you are not audible.
Yes. Any problem?
No, Padi sir, you are not audible. I completed my presentation.
Sunil sir, you there?
Yes, I am.
Please continue.
I'm here. Actually, Padi Babu, now he
Yes,
is.
No. Now I'm audible. Now I'm
Yeah,
audible because
Yeah.
I have a lot of restrictions and control. So my
Yeah.
control authority is my host. The moment he allow me tell something, I used to appear before you all. Okay, many thanks. So many thanks, Dr. Nikhil ji. You have made a very nice presentation. So before coming to back you again, now I request our webinar academic advisor Professor Dr. Sunil Kant Behera to put a light on your discussion, and after that we'll go for Q&A.
Sure.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you, sir.
And You see, before commenting on your presentation, I will tell you my experience. For the last 35 years, I have been teaching communication theories. And I have been teaching this authoritarian theory, libertarian theory, social responsibility theory, and Soviet media theory, and even the later editions by Dennis McWell, that development media theory and democratic participation.
Participant theory. Right.
Now, in today's classes, what happens? Students are not, they have impatient, they have become impatient. Now, going into the philosophical inspirations of these theories, now what we teaching only the tenets and principles of these theories. And I am talking to them and particularly telling them in India, if you take the media system in India, under what theory you will be able to classify. And they do not have an answer because if you look at the Indian media system and its operation, it takes out principles from all these theories.
Right.
Some principles from authoritarian, some from libertarian, more social responsibility, development media, all these things. Now, coming back to your presentation, I am extremely happy that you have taken me back to my understanding, the philosophical understanding of these normative theories. Rather, you have made some more addition to the knowledge that I had on these philosophical inspirations. Because they very rightly you have started with 3 questions, if I remember. If when you talked about Indian journalists, should Indian journalists downplay the cartographic assertion of Nepal versus India? Now, the last question, during COVID-19, should the journalist, even if the state is unprepared to some extent, should they broadcast or should they make it public, even if public becomes panicky by listening? So these are certain things which you have made it very contemporary relevant. But fortunately for us, you have very categorically talked about not only the 4 theories, but you have asserted and reasserted them as technocratic control, radical libertarianism, post-war compromise, and communist ideology. And the concept that you have taken right from Plato and linking it to Amish Tripaঠি's Shiva trilogy and Hobbes, then Samuel Johnson and Engel, and even the colonial rule, that was quite interesting. Now, that is the, but one thing, when we talk about the libertarian concept, libertarian theory and the philosophical inspiration, mostly we talk about John Stuart Mill, who is known as the J.S. Mill's father of libertarianism. Now, bringing the French Declaration and the Protestant Reformation when Martin Luther and John Calvin, Henry VIII, all these concepts, that is quite good. You have brought in newer perspectives and added newer philosophical interpretations. And post-war compromise and communist ideology, I understand these are the things that we have been teaching. But again, when you talked about William Patton's concepts, the 5 concepts, the other normative theories, which are again taken from some of these 4 theories, but there is a Western concept where he has mixed certain principles of 2 theories. Western, the development, revolutionary, the authoritarian, and communism. So that is very nice. And you have somebody, definitely some students will ask you a question about the relevance of normative theories in this. Relevance of normative theories, you talked about internet age. You talked about more voice. You talked about fostering communities have become easy. You have said that audience is no more atomized. Now, under these circumstances, what is the relevance of normative theories? Do we still believe in these principles of normative theories? Are our media systems operational, operational as per the tenets and principles of these theories, or these normative theories have become obsolete? This is the question perhaps you will have to answer, whether they are still relevant or they have become obsolete. If they have become obsolete, what are the new forms of normative theories which are philosophical in nature that is in operation now? But nevertheless, Nikhil, I am so happy you have made a good presentation, very academic in nature, which we normally do not discuss in classrooms. So I am very happy that you have brought in these authors, you have brought in their ideas and give food for thought to all of us, the teachers, the scholars, and the students. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you very
Now
much,
for
sir.
the question
Thank
and
you.
answer. Yeah.
So now I request Nishit to facilitate regarding the Q&A.
So can you see the screen,
Yes, we are at to see.
the chart screen? Please answer me.
No,
No.
No. Due to some reason, it is not showing actually. So what I will do is I'll just put the questions in the Word document and we'll go from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
so one question, let me tell you, Deepa Rani, question from Deepa Rani. So these theories, whatever we have discussed over here, these theories are applicable in the is it applicable in the present scenario of information in pandemic situation? Dr. Gowda, can you please answer to the question, Deepa Rani?
Yeah, these are certain questions which I mean, even the Indian media is divided. Whether had that not been the case, then we would not have a different versions of reporting, and that is taking place. That's why this is a difficult question. But as Sir talked about, and you know that by now, out of these four theories, social responsibility theory has been the most predominant normative theories, and it's because it has been left to the conscience of the media persons what to do and what not to do. Probably that also they enjoy, and I don't know whether how much they practice, but that is it is up to them. So it is very difficult to answer this question, and because that's the reason why I said that in today's world, even though you don't report something, it would be reported by somebody in the internet enabled platforms, or maybe by a citizen journalist, by a blogger, and that also compels the mainstream journalists not to suppress this kind of information for long, otherwise they will lose their credibility. So we need to revisit these normative theories and find out what is good for what situation.
So I have put some questions in the screen. Is this, are you able to read it, Dr. Nikhil?
Yeah, please give light on Dennis Maxwell's original theories of communication, which link normative theories of communication, which link of normative with link of, yeah, there are various other versions also. One is the transitional media approach. Transitional media approach, that is the latest one. It was by the Huang. Zhengzhu Wang, he says the transitional media approach is that it should not be, normative theory should not be a watertight compartment. It should be flexible. It should be flexible, keeping in mind the culture of a country, the political system of a country, the people of a country. It should be flexible. That's the latest, what a new addition to it. I didn't discuss it. I thought maybe it would be too long, and moreover, my idea was to discuss the philosophical inspirations. That's why I left it. There is
So question number 3 you have answered, all right?
yeah, yes.
So this is question number 4.
Yeah, RF's question is, which normative theory would apply to Indian media system? Arif, as I told you that few years back, it was everybody talked about the development media theory, which was a later edition. Sir Sunil sir talked about it. But now the time has come whether we would say that whether India, technically it's a developing country, but it has reached to a stage where I don't think development media theory should apply to it. So it's a call the media persons and media houses have to take. It's very difficult to answer some questions because, like with the beginning, I put you a few questions whether you will suppress information or you will reveal it. If you suppress information, then that the authority might be more complacent, and they won't put up, they won't give their 100% to do or to tackle a situation. But if you reveal everything, then the people would be in panic. So it's a catch-22 situation, and depends on the time and depends on the context what the editorial team decides. Probably I would go for this transitional media approach. The latest edition in this set of theories. But again, if you go for this transitional media approach, what would you do to a uh, particular case? If something has happened now, this COVID crisis, what would you do to a particular case? America talks about it's a champion of freedom of the press, libertarianism, and everything. But after the Twin Tower blast, they enacted this Patriot Act. They had to do it. So under crisis, under these kind of situations, there are different decisions are to be taken.
Okay, you have question number 5.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikhil. Where there is no philosopher thinker from is except one from China, is it because the dominance of the West? Yeah, there are many, but because of we all generally discuss about these 4 theories of the press, I decided to restrict to only these 4 theories, and the events and the philosophers and their philosophies that have contributed to it, and those which are documented. There are many, but had I included philosophers from India, then it would have been too vast. Probably a lot more research is required to come with something which is a documented piece rather than and rather than your imagination. So I didn't. Whatever I have brought is all documented, and that's why I left out some of the Indian philosophers. I should have given this disclaimer in the beginning.
Okay, you have question number 6.
From Ranji, please explain alternative media theory. Yeah, this alternative media theory, which we were discussing after that, there are many alternative media theory where it talks about alternative media, that is alternate to mainstream media. Mainstream media is a large media which is large coverage, but whereas alternative media which gives an alternative to the mainstream media. There are various and the community media is an example of an alternate media. That is even democratic participant theory, which Professor Behra was talking about. There also it says that the democratic participation at the grassroots level, giving voice to people at the grassroots level. So there are so many alternative theories.
Yeah, question number 7.
Yeah, the citizen journalism, as I told you, these are alternative theories coming up. Alternative theories, the later addition to these. Basically limited my presentation to these 4 theories of the press and some concepts of Hitchens concepts.
Then question number 8.
Please say something about normative. Can you explain this? Can you explain this question once more, Madhav? This
Madhav, just hold on. Let me give the
economic outcomes, normative economics to
Madhav,
achieve
I
the.
have given you the voice access. Can you just explain this question further? Madhav, you there?
Yes, I'm there. Yeah, I'm writing.
Yeah, no. You just speak because we have very limited time. You speak now.
Okay. Actually, normative economics deals with questions of what sort of economic policies should be pursued in order to achieve desired economic outcomes. Are you getting me?
Speak little louder.
Actually, so far I know normative economics deals with questions of what sort of economic policies should be pursued in order to achieve desired economic outcomes.
No, I don't think that's.
Indian government or all over the country, all over the world should regarding
Okay, you
economic
write down. We are not able
policies
to
so that
understand. Please write it
Madhav,
down.
you are not audible.
Yes. So please write it down. Dr. Nikhil, do we have a question number 9 in the screen?
Yeah, Madhav, you are not audible, first of all. And the second thing is that I just want you to explain how this question is connected to the media, normative theories of media. In that sense, I want you to explain it. Then I would answer this. Yeah.
Question number 9 is on the screen.
Well, for children, especially, I think there are many theories in communication, but for nothing specifically in normative theories, which we discussed. But you can talk about the cultivation theory, Gardner's cultivation theory, that deals with the children's behavior and other theories. There are many theories.
Okay, I think we are done with the question.
Okay, Dr. Nikhilji, many thanks. I extend my heartfelt thanks and sincere gratitude to you for joining with us in today's webinar. You had a very splendid session today. Your total discussion was very informative and useful and fruitful lecture you made today. And I hope almost all of our participants enjoy your lecture over here today. And just by seeing the chat box, I'm really happy. Most of the participants have mentioned about their feeling on your lecture. So as told by Dr. Sunil Kant Behera, Professor Behera is teaching this communication since last 35 years. And I have seen the way he put light on your discussion. Really, I am very thankful to you, and I am thankful because of your discussion in today. Really, it is helpful to all of our participants. I am really grateful and thankful to you, and I also wish the same support and cooperation in our future similar type of programs in our webinar program here in Bhubaneswar. Many thanks to you for joining with us. Many thanks, and to all the participants also. So my information to all participants, don't leave the webinar, and very shortly, maybe within a minute or so, we'll join in the next session. Next session will start within a minute. If the next session speaker, Dr. Sonia had joined, please inform me.
Thank you very much, sir. Just one line, sir. Thank you very much for inviting me. And also all the participants for these questions. I would like to tell only one thing, that only the students and participants' questions make a good teacher. So I appreciate it, and thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Dear participants, already the second speaker in the second session had already joined with us. Let me welcome Dr. Sonia Wangam, presently the assistant professor in Department of MCJ Manipur University, Imphal. And as you all know, Dr. Sonia, a journalist turned academician. Just after completion of her mass communication course from Punjab University, Chandigarh, she started her professional journey as a journalist, working with the Indian Express, New Delhi for almost 6 years as a senior sub-editor. Presently, as I told you, she is the assistant professor, Department of MCJ, Manipur University, Imphal. She teaches the foundations of print journalism, media writing, and visual communication at the Department of Mass Communication, Manipur University. She had his PhD program in social development through traditional media, with special reference to Manipur. She has published number of papers in national and international journals and has also co-written handbook on reporting and editing. And as you all know, since in this pandemic situation, we had earlier requested Dr. Sonia to focus on relooking at traditional media in the 21st century. Whether we are all in the 21st century, and Dr. Sonia will highlight the relevance of the traditional media in 21st century. I hope our discussion will help you a lot to carry forward this thing. So now I request, with these words, I request Dr. Sonia to continue her discussion.
Thank you, sir. Very warm good afternoon to Professor Sunil Kanti Behera, Sir Upendra Padi, and all. First, I would like to thank Professor Behera for giving me this opportunity to present a lecture, and this is my first webinar. I also thank Sir Upendra Padi for all your kind help and cooperation. Now I take the opportunity to start my lecture, and I have already sent my PPT for screen sharing because due to network problem over here, I was scared that there might be network issues since it is raining. So I have shared my PPT with the host in Bhubaneswar. So I would like the host in the Bhubaneswar to start the screen sharing for me. Okay, good afternoon again. My topic is relooking at traditional media in the 21st century. So next slide, please. Okay, so first, let me start with the simple definition of traditional media. As you know, traditional media is also known as folk media, and folk media, it uses culture and performing arts to disseminate information. And they are highly functional cultural institutions performing functions vital to the well-being of the society. They also provide entertainment, disseminate information, inculcate socially accepted norms and values, and perform a general socializing function. So some of the folk media forms are dramas, skits, music, dances, ballets, puppets, etc. So this media form, it has been there with mankind since ages. It was utilized by mankind since ages, but was always in the backseat. So a formal recognition was not there till a few decades back. But the calling, it came in the 20th century, some 50, 60 years back, with the shift in the paradigm, or with the shift in development paradigm. Next slide, please. So after the end of colonization by the imperialist powers, the world, it witnessed a stark divide in the development scenario. Radio and TV had already taken a strong foothold in Europe and North America, but the backward nations in Asia and Africa, they were still trying to come to terms from the impact of colonization and its aftermath. So wealth had been shifted away, and what remained in those nations were poor and illiterate citizens and protracted conflicts. These nations and their governments, they were trying to stand up on their feet after facing years of dominance. They were not in the race for economic development, but integrate strategically a host of ideas related to development that have emerged in the past, such as popular participation, grassroots development, integrated rural development, use of appropriate technology, fulfillment of basic needs, productive use of local resources, and maintenance of ecological balances. And then they also mentioned that development problems, it should be defined by the people themselves, and culture should be a mediating force in development. So this new paradigm in the 70s, because of this new paradigm, next slide please, there was renouncement of print and electronic media in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So let me explain a little bit about like how this renouncement took place, or what was this renouncement about, although I have used a very strong word, renouncement. So by the 70s, scholars and theorists, they started thinking and working on alternative means to develop those nations that were pushed back by the powerful colonizers. So as the development gap, it became wider. So scholars, they started taking tremendous interest in the developing nations or developing countries. So even in Asia, scholars, they started questioning the intellectual ethnocentrism involved in development as developed by Western scholars. Nora C. Kubral, also known as the mother of development communication, she said, the West norms of a free press is irrelevant in the practice of development communication. So another scholar from the same school of thought, Joan Zamais, also from Philippines, he echoed Kubral's viewpoint, and he also said the end goal of development communication, it should be the attainment of a higher quality of life, which takes into account not only economic, but also social, political, cultural, and moral values. So this was the same opinion that was floating around in Asia and Africa. So what happened is, as the quest for a new means to bring development was on the cards, scholars across the globe, they gathered to chalk out new communication strategies. So according to a communication scholar, Feather, he said, in this new communication strategy, the strategy, it will require ways of getting to the rural poor, many of whom were outside the influence of mass media, and persuade them to accept the new dominant class solutions for poverty, or for birth control pills, for loans, or modernization ideas. So this is what I was talking about, that renouncement part. Now it is about like persuading, like actually calling upon people who were outside the influence of mass media, and then persuading them to accept this modernization ideas or birth control pills, or like how to come out of poverty. So the traditional form of communication, which has been running parallel with human civilization, was reborn. As we know, this town crier, and then smoke, like sending messages through smoke. That was there since human civilization started. So like although these things were there, although the dances, the songs, all these things were there since human civilization started, but then it was not formally accepted. Now, what was there with us since ages, it it has been recognized. So it is like it has been reborn. So this rebirth of traditional media, it was to facilitate growth and development in the third world nations. The aim, it was not directed towards economic growth nor technological growth, but it was to better the lives and living conditions of those who are suffering from the impact of colonization and underdevelopment. Next slide, please. So theoretically, the scholars and all, they have chalked out the plans, they have met the strategies, but then now comes the other important part. It is about acceptance and implementation. So, for something to be accepted, for something to be implemented, it is always better to get that acceptance or implementation at an international level. So let's look at the international acceptance of traditional media. The first significant international recognition of the traditional media in the communication and development strategies of developing countries, it came up in 1972 when the International Planned Parenthood Federation and UNESCO, it organized in London a series of meetings on the integrated use of folk and mass media in family planning communication programs. The report of the meetings, it came up to answer as to why traditional media should be used as a communication tool to spread awareness about family planning programs. The meeting, it lengthily discussed the role folk media can play, how it can be used as an extension arm of mass media, and its acceptance as one of the most commonly accepted channels of communication. So after the London meeting, a series of seminars were held to discuss the use of traditional media as a mass communication tool. So one such important seminar is the 1973 seminar on traditional media. It was held in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Then there were like two more seminars on traditional media, which was held in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. That was in the year 1973 and again in 75. Then there was the UNESCO-sponsored inter-regional seminar come workshop on the integrated use of folk media and mass media in family planning communication program, and that was held in Delhi in 1974. After this, again, in 1975, there was a seminar on comparative popular culture that was held in Honolulu in Hawaii, and then another big seminar on indigenous structures, folk media, and non-formal education for development at West Berlin in 1980. So following this series of seminars, the non-aligned movement, it proposed a new international economic order, also known as the New World Information and Communication Order. The order was a proposal that concerns with media and communication issues, and it was included in the McBride Commission. So recognizing the importance of traditional media, the McBride Commission, Many Voices, One World, it observed. Next slide, please. So this is an excerpt from the McBride Commission report, Many Voices, One World. Practitioners of the traditional media, they use a subtle form of persuasion by presenting the required message in locally popular artistic forms. This cannot be rivaled by any other means of communication. Examples abound where song, dance, drama groups, and the like are used to promote campaigns against social evils such as alcoholism, burdensome dowries, discrimination against women, or for advances in farming, health, nutrition, and family welfare, agricultural reforms, national integration, and similar national goals. So this is the report. Okay. Now let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So I have talked like about traditional media. I have talked like how this media was reborn, then how it was internationally accepted and all these things. Now, since my topic is relooking at traditional media in the 21st century, let's jump to the 21st century. So we are now in the 21st century, and we know what is the present scenario. The present scenario is, according to the Chamber of Commerce, the media industry is one of the worst affected economy in India. The print media, let me first take a look at print media. The print media is suffering from losses of advertising revenues. So what they have done now is that they have cut down the number of pages of their edition, and some media houses, they have closed down their regional offices. Like, for example, Times of India, they have closed down their Kochi office, and then they have been removing their staff, left and right. Like Guwahati Times of India staff, they have been told to leave the organization. So like all these things are happening now. So for the company, and one more thing is, like, ever since this pandemic broke out, what I have observed is that, or like a lot of you must have also observed that earlier we could easily access the e-papers of our national dailies, but now they are charging subscription fees. So somehow, or in some way or the other, they are trying to earn some revenues because they are in losses. Like, for instance, in Indian Express, what I've heard from friends is that those people who earn annually above 35 lakhs, 30% of their salary is cut. Those who earn between 25 to 35, 25% is cut. And then the managing editor and the editor-in-chief, they have been working for the last few months without taking their salaries also. This is because the circulation figure has gone down, and then advertisers are scaling back, and then transportation issues. So many issues are there. So one medium that is like suffering like anything is the media industry in India. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's look at the television sector. We know that since everybody is locked down at home, since we are not moving out for our daily work schedules and all these things, we are glued to the television. But where is the money? Money means the advertising revenues, because the advertisers, they have scaled back. Why they have scaled back is because money issue only. And then although overall TV viewing has increased, but then there are no fresh contents. So they are rehashing old programs. Like, for example, there is rerun of Ramayana, there is rerun of Mahabharata, but then when there is rerun of Ramayana, when there is rerun of Mahabharata, I don't think the advertisers would be willing to pay the amount of money they were paying before the pandemic. So this is another issue. And then, okay, news part, everybody is glued to the news because they want to know about like what is happening in the country, about this pandemic and all this. So news part is fine, but then the entertainment part, it is suffering because the contents have dried up. So advertisers are not willing to pay what they were paying before, or they have scaled back their spendings. Next slide, please. So cinema, as we know that, or we have read the MHA guidelines, theaters will be last in the list of unlocking. So for the past, say 70, 75 days, there have been zero footfalls in the theaters. So that means like the movie industry has been losing for the past, say, almost 2.5 months, and we don't know for how long it is going to go on for the movie industry, because they will be in the last list of unlocking. And also, like, if the unlocking happens and then if theaters are opened also, there will be overcrowding of projects. So that means like films will, like, even though a film is good, or even though if a film is average or whatsoever, like, since there are so many projects to be released, so that means the theaters, they won't be able to screen their films like for more than, say, 2 or 3 weeks, because other releases will be lined up. So, and then some films, they have chosen the OTT part, over the top part, for releasing their films also. So that way, like, although they have covered up to some extent, but then like what they're supposed to be getting from the theaters, that part they have already lost it. For example, this film Angrezi Medium was released over the OTT. So like maybe in a few days from now, we'll get to know the earnings. But so far, like I could not find the earnings for Angrezi Medium. Next slide, please. Radio also, there is absence of fresh content, then advertising revenue is on the decline, and there is also decline in radio listenership because people are not moving around. Earlier, a lot of radio listeners were over their car, their vehicles, no? So transit listeners. Now, like, since less people are moving around, so there is drop in radio listeners also from this perspective. Next slide. Now, OTT, over the top. We say there is rise in over the top consumption in duration. But with OTT also, they are suffering because their content pipelines are drying up. So once the content pipelines dry up, they have to hunt for new content. So this is where the OTT sector is also suffering. As of now, they are not suffering that much, but then they will also start suffering like other media forms very soon. Next slide. And event or event management, the PR sector, it's totally lights out. According to a report by the Event and Entertainment Management Association, in the last 2 months, the event sector, they have lost 30 billion. One simple example is the IPL. The IPL should have been on, but then like because of this pandemic, it is off. Like, so, you know, like how much money is there in cricket, and like, so it's a rough estimate. 30 billion rupees have been lost in the past few months. Next slide, please. So in continuation of what I was talking about, the crisis in the media industry, I would like to add a few lines. Okay. The future is bleak as humankind has no idea for how many days, for how many weeks, months, and years we are supposed to be living with this pandemic. And then there is the other side also, how to deal with the aftermath of the pandemic. So most likely some media houses may shut down in the days to come. So if such a scenario arises, then it would be very necessary for the government and then for many organizations and like funding agencies to revisit some of the earlier strategies. Like for instance, like It is like a repetition of the end of colonization era for the developing countries. I'm talking about India, okay, for the developing countries. We are poorer now, and the poor will be the one who will be more poorer and who will suffer more also. And like, look at the demographic profile of India. We are 1.38 billion people. This is as of 2020. And of this, around 65% of the people reside in rural areas, and they are dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. So for years, we have, like most of the Indians have been stuck in the first level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay, that fooding, clothing, and shelter. So our healthcare has always taken a backseat. And one thing that we have to remember now is that this health communication or the public service announcements that are being given by the government and some media houses and related agencies, it needs to be revamped. Why? Because it is a proven fact that only information cannot change the mindset of such a diverse society in India. Like the way the government tackles the problems of malaria, birth control, or polio eradication, or adoption of new agricultural techniques by using traditional media in the rural areas, it is time to relook at the ways and means of using traditional media to overcome, tide over, or sell with this crisis. Next slide, please. So this is like the number of households with TV sets in India. In India, we have around 298 million households. Out of this, 197 million have got TV sets, but then 101 million doesn't have TV sets. Okay, so let's just keep these figures in mind. Let's move to my next slide. 101 million without TV sets. Next slide, please. And then this is the digital population. We are 1,380 million people. Out of this, 564.5 million people use the internet. So population with no access to internet or people who don't use internet is 815.5 million. And the internet penetration level is at 40%. There are around 448.2 million mobile users in India. So this is the digital population. The ones in red, okay, please have a look again. 564.5 million internet users and 815.5 million without access to internet. And mobile users, 448.2 million. Okay, let's keep these figures in mind, and then I'll just try to put across some points. Okay. So now, looking at the size of the population, the households with television sets and internet penetration, without the help of traditional media, it will be an uphill task for the government and the people to fight this virus and the crisis the newspaper industry and the electronic media is facing. So now, not only the government or the governments, the central government and the state governments, here I'll be referring to both the governments at the center and at the states, okay, and the funding agencies, the organizations and artists, okay, they need to come together so that traditional media can be born again like the way it took a rebirth in the 1970s. So most likely the new media order that communication experts are predicting these days can be a more comprehensive at entertainment in information and also for the connect with the masses. Okay. So that digital population and TV ownership population I was showing in that slide is just to come to the point that we need to depend on traditional media, because what we have at present, number of television sets, the number of internet connections, or the penetration of internet, that is not enough, because we are living in a crisis situation now, and we don't know when this crisis is going to end. So we have to if we want to come out of this crisis, or if we want to stay safe from this crisis, then we have to devise ways and means. And for these ways and means, there should be heavy dependence on traditional media. Next slide, please. So since heavy dependence, as we know, performances can't be done, halls are not open, and then social distancing, all these things is there. So as of now, my observation is that there should be more media integration or more media convergence. So for this, like, let me first start with diffusion of innovation for awareness and control. See, diffusion of innovation, it needs to be applied now. And the traditional media, it can be used by integrating with other media, or the forms can be tweaked so as to suit the present scenario. But the lessons, it must be entertainment intertwined with information. At present, the public service announcements which the government is giving, it is loaded with information. It is full of information, text-heavy information. Okay? So to suit the tastes and the sensibilities of the rural population and even urban population, and also to make the information on health education more impactful, it will be necessary to weave in entertainment in the information. Folk songs, it can be resung with health messages. Puppets can be designed with health messages, and also on how to deal with the aftermath. For instance, I read this very recently. In Vietnam, a popular pop group spread awareness about precautionary measures to fend off the deadly virus by featuring their song in a homemade animated video, and it was released by their government, their Department of Health. Okay. And again, this particular song, a famous Vietnamese dancer choreographed the song into a hand washing dance with signs and symbols to ward off the viral infection. I wouldn't say why. Okay, now let me go to the next line. Maybe this can be one of the reasons why Vietnam has zero COVID deaths till now, even though it shares border with China. There must be other precautionary measures, other messages given by their government, but then like such innovative ideas, and these things were viral on the internet. No? So I would say like maybe this particular song, animated song, this particular choreographed song might have contributed in some way or the other in warding off or in staying safe from the virus. So, and then another aspect that we need to take care of is mental health. Like, we know that if the fair appeal is not working, then for the literate and the poor, instead of scaring them more, humorous appeals can be adopted. Maybe through, like, again, those songs, puppetry, drama, or other traditional art forms. And like people today, with this more and more days of unlocking and running out of jobs, more and more people are facing financial crisis, like people from the urban areas also. And there have been instances where like two television actors, they have ended their lives, they have committed suicide, last month because of financial constraints and loss of work during this COVID-19 crisis. So this is one aspect that we need to take care of, because mental health is also important. And for this, I would say media convergence is the need of the hour. Like, okay, we can shoot puppet shows with limited crew, and instead of staging it in open grounds or halls, broadcast it on TV. The folk songs with messages can be broadcast on radio. The time has come for traditional media to lend a soldier to the broadcast industry to survive, and for itself to survive, and humankind to survive. The like so far I have talked about the TV industry, the newspaper industry, and film industry suffering. Now let me discuss a little bit about the traditional media people, the artists who are suffering also. They are suffering, but then since the economic implication is not much, there has not been much reportage on this issue. But I have a personal experience to share. Like, I did my thesis or my research on Sumang Lila, that is a traditional folk theater of Manipur. So those artists who perform this particular folk theater, their peak season is in the from the month of March till May. That means in this 3 months, they earn like they say go for around 300 to 500 shows. They perform 300 to 500 shows in this 3 months, and then they earn a few lakhs. Okay, so after this May ends, after the peak season ends, then there is a lull because it's a monsoon. So like then again the performances, it will start somewhere in the month of October. So like they earn in this 2-3 months, and then they have like some money in their pocket to survive for the next few months, and then again they start performing. So with this, in this pandemic situation right now, when they were supposed to be earning in their peak season, they have not earned. So the folk media or the traditional media artists and the performers are also suffering. This is my example of Sumang Lila, but I think the same must be everywhere all over India. So the word corona, it is becoming synonymous even with a small kid. By using different forms of traditional media, maybe through songs and then puppetry, I think there should be a section dedicated for the kids also, because we need to impart health education to these kids. Okay? Because they, you know, like they are in such an environment where like they actually don't know the good and the bad also, or the bad and the worst also. So it is very important for the government and then the media houses and even these performers and all to take note of this situation and design some programs for kids regarding their mental health. And so even health workers, they can be trained to perform street plays or skits regarding on how to stay safe and how to deal with it by strictly following the WHO guidelines. Because it is time to look at the media through a collective perspective and devise means and ways to fight this pandemic, and also for such other occurrences in the future. And one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the mediascape in India is oligopolistic. So hence, in the aftermath of this pandemic, or like when the pandemic is still on, if there is no profit, then it may lead to total closures of some media houses. So if that scenario arises, then from like before, the government needs to be prepared with different forms of traditional media in the path to recovery and rehabilitation for the public in India. Now, the unlocking yesterday, I think June 1st, the unlocking 1.0, that was what was reported in the media. So that has started. So now is the time where we need to bombard the public with more messages and announcements. after almost 70 days of closure, people are coming out, and it is in this situation we need to educate them. The fields, the factories, the roads, public transport, markets, and hotels, it will be filled with people, and the number of positive cases will keep increasing. So it is more or less the government is adopting the herd immunity system. So how long can the markets remain closed? How long can the laborers stay away from work or without work? What about the agricultural fields, the manufacturing industries and factories? These are several questions that have been floating around in our minds for the past 2 months. So it is a fight for livelihood versus healthcare. The government has taken preventive measures, but containment and lockdown cannot be the long-term solution. Until date, televisions, radio, newspaper, and the public, they have been informed about the safeguards and prevention under the whistle of police. Okay? So that means if we recollect the events that has unfolded in the past few weeks, so social distancing or wearing of masks or hand washing, it has been deliberately forced upon, and the public is following those norms out of fear of arrest and fines, most of them. Okay, so what we need now is that this habit, it needs to come from inside us. It should be instinctive. Unless and until we follow these norms from our heart and mind, it is not only the individual who will suffer, but many individuals, because it gets easily transmitted. So this is where traditional media can be used to inculcate these norms or habits in the minds of the public. So since the government, it has to deal with people from all age groups and all strata of the society, the contents, okay, it needs to be designed in such a way that it suits the taste, sense, and sensibility of people of all age groups from all cross sections of the society. Okay, so this is where the folk songs, the drama, the puppets, they will come into play, and then this is how it can be used. And then for kids, maybe animations also. So again, like the government, like we have been informed, is planning to open the educational institutions in July. So I think it is, the time is running out, and like the government, the funding agencies, the NGOs, they need to pull up their socks and then get this edutainment-based messages to bombard in the public sphere. So what the government and organizations can do now is make the traditional media apply the agenda setting theory to educate and entertain the public. As traditional media integrated with television can broadcast edutainment and variety. Here, I would like to remember cultivation analysis theory, so that the heavy exposure causes individuals to develop an illusory perception of reality, so that the public, it follows the guidelines from their own thinking and perceptions and form it as habits. Habit is what is important. So it is time for these different mediums to work as a united force. Draw up the positives from each medium, mix and match. For instance, take the cost effectiveness and easy connect with the audience of traditional media, and then TV's capability of repeat broadcast. If that is done, the habits can be cultivated up to some extent. That way, both the media can survive side by side. Because what mankind needs now in this 21st century is value creation and value realization. So my observation is that traditional media, next slide please. So my observation is that traditional media in the 21st century can be viewed from two dimensions. One is traditional media waiting for an environment like the pre-pandemic days for performances to start, or the number two is a reprise version. Okay, the new version will be interdependency, coexistence, or walking hand in hand with television, radio, and the internet, where one depends on the other heavily to survive, for all the mediums to survive and flourish. Okay, so the road ahead, it seems like a long, prolonged recovery cycle, but then it's hop floats. Okay, so I would like to end my presentation with this random quote by Steve Jobs. Next slide, please. You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. So I'll take a cue from the second line, and then I'll rephrase this for my own convenience. Okay, for my own convenience, I'll say, let's look at all this media and trust this media to connect the dots along with other media forms for the future, like the way it played a role in developing India for the 21st century in the 20th century. Thank you. Sir Padi, I'm finished with my presentation.
Yes, I'm just unmuting.
Yes, yes. Many thanks. Many thanks to you. You had a very nice session over here. So our academic advisor, Professor Sunil Kant Behra, is with us. Now I request Professor Behra to put light on your discussion.
Thank you, Sonia, for this lecture. And of course, your title was Relooking Traditional Media in the 21st Century. But you started very rightly saying that traditional media can be defined as highly functional cultural institutions performing functions for the well-being of the society. That's where the crux of traditional media lies. And then you moved on, you talked about the paradigm shift, you quoted Cora Noebral and, Nora Quebral and others, and also talked about the diffusion concept, how development, there is a paradigm shift in development from an economic development perspective to a holistic development, where today we talk more in terms of human development, where the happiness index is also a measure of development. So it is development is not only economic, but it is also social, cultural, spiritual, everything. That's a holistic development concept. And somewhere you gave an impression that there was this gradual decline in the use of traditional media. When you talked about the rebirth of traditional media with international acceptance, I have my own words. Are we waiting for the international community to give credence to the fact that the traditional media are the supreme institutions of communication, which are much closer to our hearts, particularly in developing and underdeveloped countries? And but rightly you have quoted the Many Voices, One World, the Sean McBride's Communication Commission's report, where I'm sure you must be aware that B.G. Varghese was very instrumental in ensuring that traditional media and its importance should find a place in the report. B.G. Varghese was the only Indian representative there in the McBride Commission, which happened in 1977, 75, 77, and that was very nicely quoted. And then you came back to the contemporary field, and you talked about how the media is are suffering now during the COVID phase, whether it is print or television or your cinema or the OTT or radio or even the event management and PR. What is the pitfalls and how they are suffering and how they find it very difficult in the absence of the advertising revenue. which has dried up during this COVID-19. And you also talked about the demographic profile of our 1.38 billion population and why we need traditional media. Very rightly toward the end, you have pointed out that traditional media can only supplement and complement other forms of media. We cannot say that traditional media is superior to television or television is superior to traditional media or other forms of media. All the media have to survive and survive in unison. They can complement and supplement with each other. You have prescribed. It's a little more prescriptive towards the end, how the government should function, what the government can do. Rather, I will also suggest that it is not only the government, but the civil society, the pressure groups, the communities, because nowadays we give more importance to the community media. The community also have a larger role to play in furthering the importance of the traditional media. And if you look at the content of the mainstream media today, whether what you talked of Sumang Lila, the Radha Krishna Prem Lila, or all those Leelas you will find in the television nowadays. Whether it is the epics of Mahabharata or Ramayana or Krishna Lila or Vishnu Purana or all these things which relate to our traditional forms or folk forms of communication, whether in form of song, drama or street play or puppets, all these things, you nowadays we find a lot. No doubt, they are the reruns from the past, but it has a larger viewership in today's world. Maybe because of the COVID-19, maybe because we do not have fresh content, but certainly the viewership has increased. So somewhere there is scope and there is hope for traditional media, and we can blend traditional media with the modern mass media and the digital media particularly, and we can have, they can survive in unison. So that's the best remedy that we have talked about. But I was actually ready to hear more about the traditional and folk forms of communication in the Northeast, because in the Northeast, from my experience, I'm sure this is very rich in folk forms of communication and traditional media. I was waiting to hear more about the traditional folk forms of communication from the Northeast. But nevertheless, your presentation was good. No doubt you talked more about the contemporary scenario of the media and tried to rehash at the end that traditional media is much more important, and traditional media has to be there, and that has to be used particularly in developing communication and in diffusion of innovation theory for awareness and control, as well as you have also talked about the agenda setting theory and cultivation theory. So very rightly you have suggested toward the end. Thank you, Sonia, for your presentation. But I will prefer to hear more about the traditional forms of communication of Northeast, maybe in future from you.
Sir,
thank you,
next
Sonia.
time, sir.
Thank you, Professor Behra. Many thanks for your observation, right observation. So now we'll go for Q&A. I request our host to share the questions raised by our participants on the screen. Accordingly, Dr. Sonia will attend all these questions.
So this is the question 1.
Do you think we can increase rural literacy with same resources, or we need something more? Brijendra, I would like to know what you mean by same resources. If you can elaborate on this, rephrase this question. I would like to know what is the same resources that you are trying to say. If you can elaborate on this, maybe I'll be able to answer. So I think in the meantime, I'll move to the next question
Madam, you go for the second question.
Yes, while Brijendra prepares or rephrases the second question. So if COVID-19 threat looms for long, how can media convergence take place, which entails certain processes and procedures like field activities and interpersonal communication. Already there is a decline in the creation of new media content. How can we operate the process of traditional media, which is more people centric and well, Saida, I would like to say that we are in the unlocking 1.0 stage also. And the thing is, I've already mentioned in my presentation that there has to be media convergence, and convergence in the sense that, okay, folk songs, nowadays through internet, through mobile, we can sing or record songs, and then it can be sent for compilation to the music composer or the music director, and then it can be sent via WhatsApp or via mail to the radio station or like that. And then that way folk songs, it can be say broadcast on radio, like, and for instance, even with puppet shows and that, okay, by strictly following the WHO guidelines with minimum number of crews, and then maybe totally sanitizing the studios and all these things, if need be, we can shoot some scenes. Like a few days back, I saw on news, like, if this Bollywood star, Akshay Kumar, he has started shooting for an advertisement. I think that's a social message advertisement also. And then like somehow they observed all the WHO guidelines, and then they started the production work for that. So for us also, since we are supposed to be living with this pandemic, we don't know for how long we will be living with this pandemic. So the thing is, like, slowly we have to learn how to live with this pandemic, and then maybe like following the WHO guidelines, and then making ourselves more immune to this virus. We have to try to come back to, or we need to try to come back to normalcy, not like full normalcy, but still we need to come to terms with this situation. Can I move to the next question?
Yes.
Earlier, traditional media was used for health campaigns, but in today's scenario, we are not using the power of this media. Please comment. I think this is one thing I highlighted or I spoke about a lot in my presentation. I talk about public service announcement. I said, like, what the public service announcement that the government is giving right now is loaded with information. There is no entertainment in that. So for India, where like 65% of the population still resides in the rural areas, and the population is 1.38 billion, we need to focus, or we need to design our PSS, public service announcement, in such a way that like it suits the sense and sensibility of the majority of the population. That means the illiterate class, the poor class, those people who are living below the line of poverty. So we need to put in a lot of entertainment perspective while giving that information. So I don't agree with the kind of information that the government is giving right now regarding the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now the time has come for us to put in lots of entertainment, because with this unlocking, more and more people, I mean, I think unlocking happened yesterday. People are going out to throng the markets. People are going to come out on the streets. So now is the time for us to give them this information, and that information, as I say, it should be with lots of entertainment, like the way, like the example that I mentioned about that Vietnam case, that animated song and all these things. Can I move to the next question? Now the lockdown days somewhat relaxed, where human activity is done what started. Do you think that we continue create awareness program through media? If so, could you explain how long it should continue? I don't know for how long the pandemic will last, because so I don't have an idea for like how long the media should continue. But then if it is, as I said earlier, it might take days, it might take months, it might take years also, like the way we have been living with the HIV/AIDS virus, like the way we have been living with the SARS, we have been living with MERS, we have been living with Ebola. So like we don't know how long, maybe like a vaccination might be there or no vaccination at all. But then this is the habit we need to cultivate, and this habit should be cultivated not only for COVID-19. It is about hygiene, your own hygiene. Like, it is a safeguard from any flu. But you are not only safeguarding yourself, you are also not transmitting to others. So just remember that, okay, it is good that it continues, and then like maybe after a few years it becomes a habit, like the way this mask culture is there in Japan. Thank you. Next question. What about integrating traditional and new media? I think I have talked about this also. Integration, for me, integration, it should be like traditional media and television, traditional media and radio, and traditional media with new media. If we can film small videos about traditional, like on this traditional media forms, and it can be uploaded on YouTube, and if it can be made viral, well and good. That's a good media integration. So I think this question I have answered.
Question 3 you haven't answered.
Okay. Somewhere I felt that the culture of cinema is influencing on drama and theater. What would be your observations related to my observation? I would say this is vice versa. Culture of cinema, like there are some films that are made from theater, and those stories that are drawn from theaters and drama, and then there are some theater plays and dramas where the story has been adapted from films. Like for instance, in Manipur, we have a very booming digital film industry over here. So like my thesis area, Sumang Lila, some of the Sumang Lila plays, they have been filmed into digital cinemas, and then some of the digital cinemas have been performed by artists as Sumang Lila plays. But then the tide is more on Sumang Lila plays being adopted in the film format. So like, because as I say, this particular format, this particular art form, Sumang Lila, is older as compared to this digital boom. Digital boom it started in 2000, but Sumang Lila, it started in 1894. So there is a vast gap of like say some 120 years. So like it's more of adaptation of Sumang Lila plays for digital cinema format.
Many thanks, Dr. Sonia, many thanks. Really, you had a very splendid session today, very informative, very useful and fruitful to all of our participants. After getting some lights on your discussion from Dr. Behera, I have no words. Only I can thank you. And your entire discussion was very innovative and based on real life situations. But personally to me, ye dil mange more. But the moment I saw your topic, I was really excited to know the reality in the 21st century, the importance of the traditional media. As told by Dr. Behera, we are really expecting that you should more focus on the northeast part. As told by Dr. Behera, the northeast part of our country is very highly rich. The local, the traditional media form of communication. Anyway, we'll wait to see you and to listen you in some other occasion if time permits. Anyway, my personal and sincere thanks to you. I extend my gratitude to you that you could be able to join with us, spare your valuable time in spite of your bad weather over there in Imphal in the morning. Out of your busy schedule, you could be able to spare. Thank you on behalf of Institute of Media Studies, Utkal University, from all my colleagues and hosts and my students. I extend my heartfelt sincere thanks to you for joining with us today. And I also thank all of our participants. Very sincerely, they are participating, putting questions. And I need also the same support and cooperation in next to two of our webinars on 3rd and 4th June. So with these words again, I will thank all of our participants, resource person and our advisor and our host. And I will request our host to wrap up the session over here. And tomorrow at the same time at 11 o'clock, again we'll meet with the new speaker with a new issue, new topic. Thank you.
Officer
Just
Behra,
1 second. Thank you, Sonia. This was your debut
Thank you, sir.
performance, debut webinar. You have done a wonderful job, and we are sure we will get another occasion to hear from you. Your presentation was very excellent, and that has actually created a desire in us to know more about the traditional media of the Northeast. Because of my presence here in the Northeast, I know Northeast has a very rich culture, and the traditional media is very rich here in this part of the country. And what I wanted actually, my colleagues from other parts of the country should know about it, because it is an unknown territory yet. So that's the reason I am sure we will be involving you in one such more webinars where we can strictly talk about the traditional media and folk forms of communication from the Northeast. Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Thank you,
thank
Upendrababu.
you. Thank you.